So, as you can see, I'm not the same Paul Asadoorian necessarily, getting back to 100%. So, I had a knee injury about a month and a half ago, and there was some interesting scheduling that had to take place. The rumor was going around that a 13-year-old girl kicked my ass, so I'll neither confirm nor deny that. I'll let you make your own assumptions about that. But so I'm here because I wanted to talk about something that I'm extremely passionate about. I haven't talked about it in a year or two, and not even knee surgery that happened 7 days ago. It was going to keep me from talking about what I'm going to tell you today. We're going to release a new project today that I'd like everyone to spread the word about and get involved in. I'm going to take you through some embedded device vulnerabilities and tie them into my plot to take over the world. So I used to have these kind of boring slides that talked about who I was, so instead I turned that into a PowerPoint photo montage, which I thought was a lot more exciting. So we do this thing called a podcast. So one of the things I do on the side is I run Paul.com. The primary driver behind Paul.com is a weekly podcast. Well, what is a podcast? We get together, we drink beer, we have microphones, we record it, and we talk about security. And in a keyboard, exactly. Yeah, sometimes the beer gets in the keyboard, but it's okay. So we've been doing it since about 2005, about 200 episodes, we get some awards, blah, blah, blah. Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can listen live. We also release it later for you to listen to in iTunes as a regular podcast. We also like to hack naked. Now, a lot of people ask me, why hack naked? And I'll answer that question with a question. Why not? So that's the hack naked. And we also like to drink beer, lots of beer. Beer is wonderful. We drink a lot of it on the show. We try and drink a different kind of beer. If on the show, if you have a suggestion about a beer you would like us to drink, please send me an email. We like to destroy computers. I don't know. It's kind of this a great release that we have, that if we find we can destroy computers, it takes out a lot of our frustrations that we've had over the years trying to make computers work. So we like to destroy things. We've used everything from potato guns to thermite, sledgehammers, garden tools. For our upcoming episode 200, we've got a yet even more creative way in which we're going to destroy some computers. And not my iPad, intern Darren, which I love very much, by the way. So these are some of the members of Paul.com. Like I said, our episode 200 will be coming up, which should be a lot of fun. We'll be broadcasting for an entire day, so you can tune in and listen and watch live. And my day job, I work for Tenable Security as a product evangelist. Hail Nessus. Can I get a Hail Nessus? Hail Nessus. Hallelujah! I fulfilled my job as product evangelist for today. So basically I use Tenable products. I write blogs, do videos, and podcasts all about Tenable's products, vulnerability scanning, our security center, which is like log management and security, SIM stuff as well. You can find out about all that stuff at blog.tenablesecurity.com. So now, taking over the world. The first part of this presentation I wanted to cover, well, how would you actually take over the world? And I actually spent some time thinking about, what if I had to take over the world? What would you do? What would be the things that you need? We're geeks here, right? We like requirements and specifications. Maybe we don't like them, but we talk about specifications and requirements. So what are the specifications and requirements in order to take over the world? Any guesses? Anyone? What would you need to take over the world in a general sense? Army, yeah. People, that's good. To get people, you might need money, right? Money helps. I like money. Okay, so I actually, and I was talking about this with my wife too, and she's like, you're really disturbed. I said, well, you married me, so what does that make you? Money was the first thing I said. So you can buy stuff like armies and people and stuff and big cigars and stuff like that. Power, so you need the ability to be able to influence those people to do your evil bidding. And of course, stealth. If everyone knows about your plan to take over the world, they're going to point the finger at you and say, well, why should you be in control of the world? Now, I already convinced John here over lunch, and he wants to join my clan. So anyone that wants to join my clan to take over the world, please come see me after. So, if everyone knows about your plan, they're going to try and squash it from the beginning. So you have to have some stealth when you're taking over the world. So then I thought about, well, how would I apply these elements to embedded device hacking in order to take over the world using what I know about weaknesses and elements and properties of embedded systems that we have today. So to gain power. And I thought about where embedded devices sit in our environment and sit within our networks. And I said, well, you know what? There's a lot of information flowing through embedded devices. I mean, how many people are using the wireless network here today? It's like, no, not me. Well, maybe you're using your 3G connection or your Verizon connection. There's some embedded systems that are set up capturing your information and passing it along, whether it's the wireless access point that's grabbing that information from within the room, passing it along probably to another router or embedded system. And if you're capturing that information, information is power. Everyone saw the movie Sneakers, right? It's all about the information, Marty. Yeah. So, you know, and the ability to manipulate this information and change it or manipulate it in transit is a very powerful thing as well. So, and of course, with power, you want to be able to control large numbers of computers and lots of information. Well, rather than going attacking each one of your laptops individually, taking a thumb drive, maybe putting it into Tim Hare's laptop, maybe doing a wireless man-in-the-middle attack and getting a couple more, by capturing and compromising one embedded system that is somewhere capturing everyone's information, I can, in one compromise, get everyone's information all at once. So it has that property going for it as well. Now, speaking of power, you want to be able to control things that you can influence yet even more power with, like electrical companies, power companies. There's tons of embedded systems where, conveniently, security has been ignored completely, for the most part, in all of these various industries. Now, I mean, this is a totally whole separate talk altogether, so I won't go into too much detail here. But great resources. If you see Travis Goodspeed here, you know, grab his ear. He's more than happy to tell you about them. He's doing something very similar to what we're doing with our project and trying to raise awareness about vulnerabilities that exist, and in his case, exist in control systems. Josh Wright is another researcher that publishes some great information about control system security as well, especially Zigbee embedded systems. So we need to make money. We need to make lots of money. So I thought about which embedded devices could I target that would make me money. And video games were the first one to come around. The video game industry is a huge industry, multi-billion, billion, a lot of money, billion probably, right, flowing through this industry. A lot of the video game systems now are tied into this commerce stream, right? On your Xbox, you can rent a movie. On your PlayStation 3, you can do interactive gaming. Whatever the case may be, there's some kind of financial transaction that's happening so that on my Wii, I can buy points, and those points are turning my money into Wii points, for example. So video games is one aspect of it. Entertainment. And now, personally, I have a lot of the devices that I listed up on the slide because I'm kind of an entertainment junkie like that. I don't like to give the cable companies a lot of money. I'd rather have more choice and buy what I want. So I have a Roku. I have the new TiVo that came out. I've got, what else do I have? The Apple TV. So these are all devices that sit on the network, and somehow I'm buying transactions over these systems. And the way it works, and I'm kind of just starting to look into it, is they'll put up a code on the screen, and then you have to go to the website and enter that code, and then it magically ties it into your account. So these embedded systems are playing a part in the transactions that are happening for your entertainment devices, which, by the way, I think very soon are going to be built into every television being sold in the industry as well, and are going to be even more ubiquitous. Wireless routers, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about wireless routers. It's one of the things that I like to talk about in research. I have a lot of wireless routers. I built an entirely new 802.11n wireless network at my house to support my entertainment devices. And so I've got some cool stuff that I found on the embedded devices that I found to support that whole network. And of course, Larry Pesce and I wrote a book on hacking Linksys routers, so I've been picking up where I left off with that research. And printers and fax machines, and a lot of the pen tests that I went on, I would actually go look for the printers and fax machines because there would be documents usually laying around in the cache or somewhere on the file systems if they had file systems. And it would be some of the most sensitive information I would get on the pen test because what do you print and fax out? Forms, checks, bank information. It's usually really sensitive documents that are going through your printers and fax machines. So to speak to the stealth, no one pays attention to these embedded systems until they're broken. So if you look up the definition of an embedded system, it's a special purpose-built device. It's built to perform one small function. If it's performing that function, usually people leave it alone. How many dusty Linksys routers that haven't been touched in years are sitting in your family, friends, neighbors' houses, and then you get a call, why? Because it's not working. You don't get a call because, you know, it's been running really good for a while. I was just wondering if you can come check up on it. No, you only get the call when it breaks. So that's one of the advantages that you have is no one's really looking or paying attention to these devices. Security is often left out as a byproduct of the industry. And what I've noticed, especially in home-based routers, having done a lot of work in that area, I've noticed that whoever can put out the cheapest router wins. Whoever can put out not just the cheapest router, but the cheapest router with the most features wins. And there's always new technology and new features coming up for people to put out new and cheaper routers. So by cutting cost of putting more functionality on a single chip, by leaving things out like security, they can produce a cheaper router. And they'll do whatever it takes to be that company, Linksys, Cisco, D-Link, Netgear. Like, what's the difference between those routers? The guts in them are essentially the same. It's whoever can manufacture it the cheapest. That has led to extremely poor security on these devices, and I'll show you some really good examples of that. And of course, there's no interactive user. It's not a computer where someone's going to maybe run an antivirus scan or look at what's going on. A lot of times, there's no full-time interactive user. There's ways to interact with a device, but not in the same way you would with a regular computer. To speak more to stealth, you know, everyone that's looking for a vulnerability to raise awareness on this subject doesn't have every model and firmware version available. So there isn't, like, if I had the entire line of D-Link routers, that would be great. If someone wants to send that to me, I would gladly accept it, and I'd send you a paul.com t-shirt or something. But so every researcher out there doesn't have access to the vulnerability. Someone was asking me, well, have you looked into the HP printer vulnerabilities recently and how you can pivot across those? I said, well, no, because I can't, well, legally get access to those devices in order to do testing. I'm more than happy to do it, but I just don't have a $10,000 HP printer laying around at home. And I hate printers, so I would never go seek that out unless someone wanted to give me one to do security testing with. So purpose-built usually means easy. They want, a lot of times when it comes to embedded systems, for whatever the purpose, I mean, let's use the wireless router as an example, you want the user to go buy it, take it home, plug it in, and magic, it works. And in order to accomplish that, security just gets in the way of that whole experience. And you know, they've got these new fancy buttons now that you can push and sync up keys and all that stuff. That's only really one part of the security equation, and that's helped to a certain degree. But easy doesn't always equal security, as everyone knows. So, and I said, you know, vendors are focused on profit and competition. I talked about that. So the other thing that I wanted to prove, so now we've talked about power, we've talked about money, we've talked about stealth. Let's talk about ubiquity. How widespread are these devices enough that we could use them to assert power and stealth and gain money? And one of the resources that I found to help build my case was Wiggle. Has anyone gone to wiggle.net? A couple of people? So wiggle.net, there's a bunch of people right now war driving, like 802.11 war driving, looking for open wireless access points right now, and they're sending their data all the access points that they found, and their geographic information, and they're uploading it to wiggle.net, and wiggle.net is crunching all of that data and producing the results from, almost thousands of people that are war driving. All the statistics are on their site. But one of the interesting things that I found was they talked about, has some graphs about manufacturer stats. So what we have here is these are the total number of networks found. Now, I like to think that they're unique, and I like to think that they look at a network as a unique BSSID or the wireless MAC address, so that these are actually unique networks. So there's almost 2 million networks in there. Is that 2 million? Yeah. 2 million networks, is it? Yes. So they have no SSID, and there are 1.7 million with Linksys. Well, that tells me Linksys got some good permeation out there. So if I want to go start attacking devices, Linksys might be a good target because it's the default SSID for Linksys routers. And then, hey, look, here's Netgear and Belkin and Action Tech. That tells me these are the major manufacturers producing the most routers. So if I want to assert the most amount of control, stealth, and gain the most money, these are the ones that I want to target. And there are some more manufacturer statistics over here as well that are giving numbers in the millions of these devices that are deployed. And again, you're not just compromising one computer when you compromise these systems, you could be compromising multiple. What if it's in something like a coffee shop or a conference center? Score, right? Because now there's tons of people coming through there and you're getting all kinds of juicy stuff and compromising workstations that are transient. And just to give you a visual representation of just how permeated a city like Boston would be with wireless, this is wiggles.net, and they've overlaid their information onto Google Maps. So you can go look up your city or town and see what your wireless is like. All those little red dots and green dots are access points. I believe the green dots are open access points, and the red represents encryption. I think WEP would count as encryption as much as it shouldn't, but I think it does. So now we know we can use them to gain power. You can use them to make money. We can be stealthy. They're everywhere. Now we just need to prove that they're vulnerable. And this was as much fun as it was harassing my wife to talk about taking over the world, this was the most fun part for me, is to find out vulnerabilities on some of these routers. Now, there was a project from researchers at Columbia University, and they scanned millions and millions of IP addresses on the internet, and they found that, I think it was 1% or 21,000 routers, webcams were open to remote attack as their administrative interfaces were wide open for everyone to see. And it was good research. I applaud their research, and I hope that they continue to do that and raise awareness on this issue. However, they published in the article, this is a press article about the researchers from Columbia. They said, the researchers have provided ISPs with their findings in hope that they will do something to protect vulnerable customers. Do you think they did that? No. So, and here's a good example of an ISP that has not done that, and this is Time Warner. We'll use as an example. No one from Time Warner's here in the room, right? Okay, good. So there was a person that figured out, I forget if it was he set a different cookie in his browser or disabled, I think it was disabled JavaScript. He figured out he could go in and log into the administrative interface of any router that was on the Time Warner network of a certain model. And he figured out this, huge security hole. Basically, with no security, he can go log into any router. And the Time Warner said, well, we can't really do anything about it, was their response. And you can go read the whole story, but that's the gist of the story. Really bad vulnerability. Time Warner goes, so what? However, in the article it said, Time Warner says the SMC 8014 modem routers are just a small portion of the 14 million devices its customers were using. I said, wow, 14 million devices. Wouldn't I like to get some of that, huh? That would help for my plot to take over the world for sure. So I set out to find some example vulnerabilities, knowing all of the good things they can get me in my plot to take over the world, and knowing that ISPs, like Time Warner, aren't patching vulnerabilities, and knowing that there's some vulnerabilities out there. So there are tons of fail on the internet with respects to wireless routers. One of the ones I researched on my own, independent of someone may or may not have scanned about 50 million IP addresses on the internet. Nothing you see here. And one of the other vulnerabilities I found was the HNAP vulnerability, which I'll talk about. We'll talk about one example with printers, and one example is on my Roku player that I found some really bad security fail, and then we'll get into the rest of the project that we're working on. So what if Bob, right? We use Bob. Anytime we do something or there's something to be done that is a little shady, it's Bob. And Bob happily sends us the results because we have a good relationship with Bob. So what if Bob were to scan the internet and look for, I don't know, devices open on port 80? And what if Bob were to use Google and find the most popular ISPs that provide cable modem routers to users, like Time Warner, like Comcast, Roadrunner, and then use Aaron to discover the IP address ranges that are assigned to those ISPs that are being used by their subscribers? Bob did all this, of course. Then use Nmap to discover all of the devices that have been opened on port 80 and identify the service listening. So grab the banner, tell me that it's an HTTP server, and do a service discovery. I actually used a light service discovery. I'll show you the command that Bob used and show you how that light service discovery helped go quicker. Then manually poke through the results and find interesting stuff, trends, things for observation. Shodan was very handy too. Now Shodan is a catalog of services on the internet. So I believe that the Shodan author is doing the very same thing that Bob is doing, going out scanning the internet, except Shodan is storing them in a database, providing you with a website to go query the results. And Bob used Shodan to geographically locate specific routers, for example. So say there was a Zixil or a Huawei router, I think that's how you pronounce that, that you knew had some, what is it? Huawei, thank you. A Huawei router that had some specific vulnerabilities that you might want to target. Well, you might want to find out which ISPs maybe deployed 14 million of those devices. Well, Shodan is a good indicator because it's going to tell you which countries. Now, my plot for world domination, I want to be able to take it slow. I don't want to bite off more than I can chew and compromise a country at a time. Colombia was an attractive carb target. They've got good coffee, goes good with giant cigars, that kind of thing. And, find the Whois lookup. So I do this search here, look for Huawei routers. Colombia's got a bunch of them. Here's one of the IP addresses. I do a Whois lookup on it. The Whois lookup returns comprehensive results of all the IP addresses that could be assigned to that ISP, and then scan that ISP to get a full, complete listing, because Shodan's not complete, of all of the vulnerable routers assigned to that ISP in Colombia. So it's kind of like geographic embedded device hacking targeting. Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. So then you start to go in and say, well, so I found all these routers. Well, what happens if I just open a web browser and browse to one of these routers' external IP addresses? I mean, certainly the ISP should block port 80 and prevent this from happening and prevent the entire internet from managing your routers, whether it belongs to you or the ISP. But fortunately for us in our quest for world domination, that's not true. They let you browse to the port, and they let you log in. And they let you log in sometimes without a password, which I'll show you. Sometimes it requires a default password. And you can do things like change someone's DNS servers. So what can you do if you can change the DNS servers that someone is using? Yeah, well, Bob, thank you, Tim, could control their internets in a very big way. I mean, you control where they go. If they go to their bank, they're not going to their bank. They're coming to my server, which looks like their bank, and I'm getting all of their account information. So now we've got money. Yay, we can buy armies and cigars. So here's some more D-Link router fails. So it's not just the ones that are provided by the ISP, but they're also regular D-Link routers that someone sets up, wide open to the internet. Again, we have the DNS server changing problem as well. This one is a Netgear router, which again lets you change the DNS servers as well. This was a username of admin and a password of password. Now, finding the default passwords were all, I mean, it wasn't as easy as just knowing one or two. I mean, you probably had to know about a dozen different combinations, and it could vary by ISP as to which default passwords were available and assigned maybe by the ISP. A lot of people leave the defaults as well, and that's an example of that. And it has global reach. This is a Belkin ADSL modem router that is distributed by the ISP in Australia. And this one here actually gives me the email address of the user and lets me see their settings and their IP address and things like that. This one required, and I forget where this one was, some foreign... Turkey, I believe it was Turkey, thank you. A Turkish ISP. This one required no password. No password. Just browse to the web interface of your ADSL cable modem router, and I can change all of the settings without a password. And that's the level of security being implemented by ISPs that are managing these cable modems, like similar to Time Warner having the 14 million. This is so easy that Nicole Richie can do it. Did anyone see this story? Nicole Richie actually socially engineered some of her friends' Twitter accounts and started making tweets of them. And some of these hacks don't even require social engineering. It doesn't even require a password. It's so easy, even Nicole Richie could do it. Now, my rumor is that she's going to attend DEF CON and talk about and give a presentation about hacking Twitter. I'm just kidding. So, this one, I thought was interesting. This one's trying to fool you. So it doesn't just log you in when you browse to it. It actually gives you a password prompt with a password already filled in. And if you click login, it logs you right into the router. Password's already there. Like, that's awesome. Thank you so much. You're making my job of taking over the world so much easier. So no social engineering required for that one. This was yet a different ISP. This one was in Kuwait. And again, default configurations being applied to all of the different subscribers. This one was username was support and the password was support. A little bit of Google searching, you can find that very, very easily, what the default password is being set for these various ISPs in the different countries. So this gets scary. As I said, you can target countries, you can change DNS servers, you can potentially, the really scary one, now changing DNS servers is handy. The really scary one is, what if I can develop some custom firmware that I can upload to the router? That firmware presents the same user interface as the user or ISP is used to managing. But under the covers, this firmware is just grabbing all of your traffic. It's grabbing all of your passwords. It's redirecting your traffic to malicious places. So this is really the ultimate hack that I'm looking for. The problem is trying to get this in a ubiquitous environment is very difficult. All of these routers have different platforms, which right now is working for them in terms of security, because there's not one unified platform that I can create one firmware in order to upload. So that's one of the attacks that we're working on. So a few weeks ago, I was setting up my brand new WET 610N made by Cisco Linksys. And this was a gaming adapter, so it's Ethernet on one side and 802.11n, you know, the new N where you can get 300 megabits a second over the wireless on a device that has a 100 megabit Ethernet port. I thought that was interesting. So I thought, well, you know, I'm going to have to cancel my presentation at source. I thought all was lost. Someone must have been listening to me when I preached on my podcast for so long, and still do, that manufacturers need to make the user change the default password. And this device did. It said, you have to enter a new password. So the first password I tried was admin. It said, no, no, no. You have to enter a different password than the one that's there. I said, someone's been listening. It's a gift from the gods. This is fantastic. They're forcing users to change passwords. Well, like, I can go play golf now. Like, I'm done. However, I got to the next screen. It said, below other settings for your wireless bridge, Linksys highly recommends that you print your settings or write them down. Great advice, Cisco Linksys. Then there was a checkbox to save these settings in a text file on your desktop in clear text. Epic fail. So while that is better than just leaving the default or not making the user change it, there's obviously still some education that we have to do with these vendors to make them realize that this is not security. It's better than what you had before, but not what we're looking for. So now let's go on to finding some of these devices. As I found, or Bob told me, he found that scanning the internet is a very time-consuming process. And when you're limiting to one port, it's not so bad. It's still kind of time-consuming. And here is the, if anyone wants to go scan a very large network with permission, not the internet, please, and wants to go do that, you can see the nmap command that I used here. I found version light to be really great in helping me scan the internet much faster. The min host group to 1024 helped as well, which is the minimum number of hosts it'll start scanning at one time. So then you can see I've got about 500,000 IP addresses in about 2.7 hours. I did about 22 million in 37.5 hours. Bob did 2 chunks of about 50 million IP addresses, which totaled about probably close to 80 hours to scan the internet. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, it's 80 hours, so you go do other things, hack into other, Bob goes off and does other evil things, I'm sure, while this whole thing is running. But I wanted something to go a little faster. So I started thinking about, and I forget who the quote is from, but they said, surround yourself with very intelligent people. And I do that both in my job at Tenable and on paul.com. So I pull resources in, and I said, well, how would we do this quicker? And I got back some great results, and I found some great results on my own. One is NTP. I mean, HD Moore just released recently that he did a great presentation on using NTP to do discovery. And that's great. I'm going to use that and show you some examples of that. Also, the DNS zone transfers from certain DDNS providers. So these are dynamic DNS providers. So if you've got an IP address that changes, you can subscribe to some of these services. They'll attach a name to it, and when your IP address changes, your name will resolve to the new IP address. So you'll have to excuse me while I sit down. I stood for as long as I can. I'm not going anywhere, just sitting. Okay. So the other way would be to brute force the subdomains within a particular DDNS provider. So that means try apple.ourlinksys.com and so on and so forth, orange.ourlinksys.com, and try and find hosts in there. Now that can be faster than scanning the internet. It's not as fast as a zone transfer, as you'll see. And GNU Citizen has a tool that they released where called DNS map, DNS, I forget what it's called. But they've got a tool that does the DNS brute forcing. There's also a module in the Metasploit framework that can do it as well, written by Carlos Perez. So I wanted to try the NTP method because it's really new, and I had heard about this story where Netgear shipped a particular model wireless router and hard-coded the NTP server into the firmware. So whoever got this router, their NTP server that their router would go query is at the University of Wisconsin's computer science department. Now, they weren't too happy about that when the router started shipping, and they got the resulting distributed denial of services attack of 11 million IP addresses hitting their NTP server all at once. That was bad. There was some backlash from that. Now, they issued a firmware fix to change the NTP server so people's routers would start querying Netgear NTP servers. However, who applies firmware updates, right? We established in the beginning of the presentation that most of our family and friends that have these routers, they sit there and collect dust and they never ask about them until they break. So I said, well, it'd be interesting to go query that server, which I found on the internet in a screenshot that is the NTP server that was hard-coded into the Netgear routers. So I said, well, let's do this. I said, if no one's updated their firmware, that means they're still querying the server. I can query this NTP server and get a list of clients that have actively, or the last 600 clients that have queried that NTP server. I'm like, if those are cable modem IP address ranges, they're routers. And not only are they routers, but they're vulnerable routers. So I put my theory to a test. I logged into trusty Metasploit, and I ran the NTP mon list. I set my NTP server to the infamous one at Wisconsin, and I ran it, and I got back a whole bunch of IP addresses. I took those IP addresses with a little command line kung fu, and I translated them into domain names that turns out there was a lot of cable modem and DSL providers in that list. And that tells me that there's an awful lot of people out there that haven't updated their firmware, and that if I persisted, I could continually collect their IP addresses, and if I were really evil and wanted to take over the world, I would target them with attacks. So I thought that was a neat way to find vulnerable routers. Or you could log in and update it for them if you wanted to be nice. But people have gone to jail for writing worms that patch things too, right? So I don't want to go there either. In a much, much, much faster way than the 37 hours to find hosts on the internet that are potentially vulnerable and specifically embedded devices is to do a zone transfer. Now I'm using built-in shell tools here on a Linux machine, and I'm using the domain ourlinksys.com. And I realized that I just told everyone about that, and I haven't really contacted them to tell them that this was broken, so please use this information for good and not evil. And one of their DNS servers at that IP address there, which no one can see, right, actually allows for a zone transfer. And ourlinksys.com is one of those DDNS providers. It spits back a list of about 12,000 hosts in 2.5 seconds. That's way faster than scanning the internet with Nmap. Yes. Oh yeah, you're right, John. Thank you. 120,000. I'm having trouble seeing numbers today. It's the medication. So 120,000 hosts, way faster than 37 hours. So again, check out Metasploit's gather DNS enum. Will do this as well as do the subdomain brute forcing. It'll transfer SRV records, it'll read text records. It's kind of like the Swiss Army knife for DNS hacking. It's in Metasploit, Carlos wrote it, and it works really well. I was having some trouble, but I was trying to use the standalone version that wasn't up to date, but the one in the latest SVN trunk of Metasploit seemed to work the best for me. So here's how you can target specific devices. If I say I just bought a new D-Link DIR 655 router, and I have it in my possession, if I want to go find vulnerabilities in it, I can maybe bring up its web interface and say, hey, look, www.dlinkddns.com. That's the default one first in the list for everyone who buys a D-Link router, even the one that I bought. So if I were to find vulnerabilities on my router and then target that DDNS provider with subdomain brute forcing or try and do a zone transfer from one of their DNS servers, which didn't work, by the way, Bob told me. I could then start targeting specific routers with vulnerabilities and find them really easily. So here are some of the steps that attackers would go through in order to control routers. So you buy a router and you find a vulnerability in it. Then you see what DDNS providers it supports by default. You try the zone transfer route. I mean, likely that's not going to work. One of the things Bob told me he was working on was getting a list of almost all of the DDNS providers and then feeding that into the script within Metasploit that automatically tries a zone transfer against every name server that supports the domain and seeing all of the ones which support zone transfers, and that could be a way to find more than just the one example that we put up there. So zone transfer. If zone transfer fails, we can start brute forcing subdomains so we can get dictionaries of likely host names, then brute force the subdomains to find devices. That can be faster. We can check the NTP settings, see if it points to an NTP server, not likely. We, of course, can also scan the internet at random, which tend to be kind of slow. Then using all of those methods, get a nice list of routers to attack and exploit the vulnerabilities and control the routers. So that's the kind of methodology of the attack that I envision that I think we need to start protecting ourselves against. Okay, let's move on to printers. And this one is just hilarious. And I didn't see it the first time I went to it, but if you look up here, Bob found this HP printer on the internet, and it says, in the dialog box that's asking you for a username and password. Now, we all know how important both a username and a password is, right? Important that we have both. Now, it's not two-factor authentication, but it's a username and a password. This dialog box comes up, prompting for a username and a password, and says, to view this page, you must log into this area, and then it says, HP Jet Direct Networking, password only, no username required. Hey, thanks! You eliminated one of the variables for me, you enter the password of password into the password store, and you can control the printer. That's the level of thinking of terms of security that has gone into a lot of these devices. Yes, and it will be unencrypted as well in HTTP, yes. That's one of the points I'll make later, is that we want secure management protocols to be the default, right? Oh my God, 5 minutes. Okay, so if you've got a Roku device on your network, you can netcat to that port and you can control your Roku device. It's pretty cool. So if you have one, check it out. There's some world domination propaganda. So I'll talk quickly about the potential Linksys vulnerability. It was reported to Cisco PCERT. It turns out it was an HNAP vulnerability that causes the admin interface to crash. Turns out not to be a vulnerability. That's how you can try and reproduce it. Yes, it's lame. However, the information I got from Cisco was there's no way to disable HMAP. I wasn't fuzzing HNAP. I was trying to send it a legitimate request, and I crashed something. I contacted Cisco, and they said, well, we have no way to disable that. I'm like, but I haven't even got to fuzzing it yet. What if I do find something? You can't even tell people to disable it because you can't do that. So one of the things that I want to work on is getting vendors to help us actually be able to turn things off. So seriously, what do we do about it? I mean, I could stand here and talk about embedded system security fail until you're tired of hearing about it, which was probably 15 minutes ago or longer. I could find lots of zero-day exploits and I could release them all over the place. I don't think it's going to help. I wanted to try something different. I wanted to try something that we can work as a community in order to affect change in the industry to fix these problems that I've been talking about for years, and I keep talking about until I'm blue in the face, and I still see stuff like routers being deployed with no passwords. So, how do we fix it? Yes, I will not stop talking about this even with a giant pink binky in my mouth. Securityfail.com. I remembered we owned securityfail.com. I was like, that's pretty cool. That's how this whole project actually started. I said, we got to do something with this because this is just too cool, this domain. So this is where we parked it. Now, it used to redirect to www.grc.com. Giggity. Now, it's actually a public wiki, which is up now, where you can go. And what I want from you, and we've gotten lots of stories from people in the past that say, hey, I've got this HP printer. Look at the security fail on it. Hey, I've got this implementation issue, right? And this is what we're attacking here. We're not attacking the security. We're attacking the implementation. And I've got all these issues, and they send them to us, and we talk to them about the show. So I want this site to be able to catalog them, and hopefully we can use it to start steering vendors in the right direction, despite all of their, crying and moaning about not implementing security, and write about it. Write about it anonymously. The account creation is not open yet, but if you send me an email, I will create you an account, and you can write an article or a story that talks about embedded device security fail. Now, we've got some hooks in there where we can start talking about other things like protocols, like SSL, which is broken a lot. But let's focus on embedded systems for now. So the goal is to raise awareness, and we want to, I've highlighted some preliminary goals. I want people to work with the industry to force users to select the password, no more default passwords. I want users to disable protocols if they need to and use secure management protocols by default. I want ISPs to start blocking inbound port 80 to their DSL providers to help protect their routers. And I also want them to manage their customers and implement security. So please, submit your stories. I want this to be a vocal talking point. You can send them to me anonymously if you want. The guys at paul.com, we're going to post our stories out there. I've got more information associated with this talk that I will release as well. I'm already going over my time now. So go to securityfail.com. Like I said, email me for an account. This is a completely nonprofit venture, by the way. I don't want to make any money off of this. I want this to be a vendor-agnostic way for people to voice their concerns and their issues with embedded devices. Now, what about world domination? It turns out there's an app for that. Did you know that? So So the things that I wanted to cover were the Chuck Norris worm, which could have been, I think, just a version of a previous embedded systems worm, and we can talk about the flame war I had with some Linux people on the comments for a blog post from IT World, which was kind of funny. I did not cover static analysis of firmware, which I'm working on, which means mounting the file systems of firmware from a binary file, which is really, really interesting. I just didn't have room for it. I didn't do a lot of analyzing video game systems, TiVo and Blu-ray players, and how they're connecting to the network and communicating. I did have the Roku example, which I kind of breezed through, but that one's in there. I didn't talk about wireless worms and default wireless settings. So we talked about default settings from the internet side, but what about default wireless settings that can spread wirelessly amongst the community? And how segmentation is just a Band-Aid. And Carlos, one of the members of Paul.com, he fell right into this trap and he said, well, I always recommend the customers segment it. I'm like, that's just a Band-Aid. You're not fixing the problem. You're taking what you know is vulnerable and you're kind of like throwing it over there in the corner and saying, well, if it's over there, no one will attack it. But we're not addressing the fundamental issues that all of these devices have and the attitude and of the vendors that make them to produce them and be insecure. So again, securityfail.com, go there, write about this failure that is embedded device security, and hopefully we can affect some change in the industry. And if you're interested in any of the paul.com stuff, my email is paul@paul.com.com. Send email to me and I can create you an account in the wiki. So, how did I do on the 5-minute thing? Any questions? No questions? Anyone want a question?
All right, so you didn't really cover this, but do you mind any certain kinds of vulnerabilities or attack techniques that are unique to embedded systems, or maybe a little more prevalent in embedded systems than others, or is it just the same old stuff?
It's the same old stuff for the most part. It's weak passwords. It's the unique embedded stuff tends to be in the protocols that you only find on embedded systems. Like I didn't really talk about HNAP, but HNAP is a control protocol for more like not universal, similar to universal plug and play in the way it works with SOAP requests over HTTP, but in that if you place a support call to Cisco, they can log into your desktop and then query your router and get information from it over HNAP is what they intended that protocol to use. It was created by Cisco. So you see a lot of the same protocol-like implementation issues because you don't see HNAP on systems, more likely on embedded systems. So it's those protocols that are giving us the embedded type specific vulnerabilities. Most of the other stuff is just implementations of Telnet and SNMP and stupid stuff like that. So. That's a good point. Any other questions? Anyone want to share a story about how embedded security sucks? Yes, volunteer.
When I first moved into my house, I just scanned the neighborhood for open networks. Didn't have anything at the time. And found one, had the address on it and everything. And met the woman, and oh, what do you do for work? I said, oh, computer security. Speaking of which, open network.
Speaking of which, we need to talk.
Open router. She said, a what?
Yeah. A what? I have a what? I have a router? Yeah.
Just, I don't even have a computer.
Nah.
I don't know.
That's pretty funny.
Installs in your garage and you bought the house with it or what?
Yeah, it brings up a good point about how the awareness level of the average people who don't do computers, you know, they have wireless routers and they don't understand the security, and we should take it upon ourselves to help explain it to them so that their neighbors can be secure too. Question, Dan? You've got a friend named Bob too. Yeah. Oh, very nice, very nice. So Bob did some more driving, found that the administrative interfaces on 80% of the routers that he scanned were the default passwords, logged in and blocked MySpace and Facebook on them. That's great. Yeah, you made their networks more secure, or Bob did. Any other questions? Okay, I'll be around for a little while if anyone wants to come find me.